Well, good morning and welcome to this class. Personal evangelism is what the class is all about. I want to begin the class this morning by introducing myself, so you get to know me, just a little bit about me. I'll spend a few minutes to give a bit of a background to this. How many of you were at the grand opening for the school in September? All right, 3 of you were. I actually was the speaker here at that event. I walked by there yesterday and I thought, wow, what a difference between yesterday and last September. It was so beautiful, perfect day. You guys remember that beautiful day. And we had a good sized crowd out. So that was one contact you may have had. And then I've also taught class on marriage and the family at the Millar Campus back 2 years ago now, on marriage and the family. We had a nice group of about 25 students there. And so that was my involvement with that. So I'm going to begin by telling you my testimony and a little bit about myself, because a lot of what I say will kind of interact with my previous life and my experiences. And by the end of this class, you'll know a lot kind of where I'm coming from and how I approach evangelism and my experience in it. I grew up in the province of Saskatchewan. I draw cartoons, and these presentations that I make are part of the way I do my Sunday morning services. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But I was born in a place called Insinger, Saskatchewan, along number 16 highway where I was. And there used to be a sign there, the birthplace of Henry was Ernie, but I think the wind blew it over, so it's not there anymore. Picture my parents, my 2 older sisters. And then when I was born, of course, it was the joy of my mother's life. My dad was actually a welder. He owned a business called Alex Welding and Blacksmithing. They were part of the Greek Orthodox Church in northeastern Saskatchewan, there where we were, it was a village called Teulon in Saskatchewan that I lived in. That's actually my grandpa's gravestone. And as I was growing up, my dad was actually quite a heavy drinker. He was actually an alcoholic. This picture here is him during his drinking days. He had his welding shop was in the back there, you can see. I remember the impact that had on me as a child growing up, because the drinking caused them to argue an awful lot, tremendously conflicting for me personally, and it gave me tremendous sense of feelings of insecurity. And then an amazing thing happened. When I was about 6 years of age, my dad found the Lord, and his life was 180 degrees transformed. And this is a picture of him shortly thereafter. And I used to say, out went the bottle and in came the Bible into our house, because our lives are totally transformed. And they started going to a Bible preaching church instead of the Greek Orthodox Church. And I'll never forget the Sunday morning I was sitting as a 7-year-old boy in church, and the pastor kind of stretched out his hands. I don't remember what he said, but something about the death of Christ. And as he was speaking about that, I remember God spoke to me, and essentially the concept that came to my mind as a 7-year-old boy is, I have to respond to this. I have to respond. I knew that as clearly back then as I do today. I knew all the implications. It was very, very clear in my mind. Of course, now I know all the theology behind that and that sort of thing. But at that point in time, I knew I have to respond. And I wrestled with that decision actually for a couple of years. My dad used to have an old Minneapolis Moline tractor in his welding shop. I remember one winter, I was probably 8 at this point in time, just wrestling with the thought. And the thought came to my mind, if I died tonight, do I know for sure I'd go to heaven? And I remember thinking, no, I wouldn't go to heaven. Well, I wrestled with that concept, and I remember being afraid to go to sleep at night. I remember thinking that if I go to sleep, I might die in my sleep. When you're awake, you can kind of keep yourself alive, which is, of course, a very errant thinking for an 8-year-old boy. But as an 8-year-old boy, that's what you think. And I remember wrestling with this until finally in the summer of when I was 9 years old, I went to a Bible camp at Crystal Lake Bible Camp, just north of Kenora, Saskatchewan, Yorkton, Saskatchewan. There on July 25th, 1958, I accepted Jesus as my Savior. That turned my life around as well. Actually, a few years ago, I went back to that camp. It's since moved to another place in Saskatchewan. It's now called Ketchen Lake Bible Camp. But the old girls' dorm is still there, and I remember finding the very spot where I prayed and asked Jesus into my heart. A number of years ago, I went there and took a selfie there at the very, very place where I asked Jesus into my heart, where Jesus said, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and will dine with him and he with me." And so from that point on, my life just changed, and I began to realize that there was a purpose, a destiny to my life. It just kind of gradually, I never had any kind of a major cathartic breakthrough, I guess you could call it, in thinking in this way. But it just, I began to think, my purpose of my life, I'm going to be a pastor someday. Coincidentally, the girl that I later met and married, I found out, she told me after when we were dating, that all of her life she was growing up, she used to say to herself that I'm going to grow up and be a pastor's wife. And I used to joke with that, because I said that means guaranteed you got married. But anyways, that was the way she experienced it in her life. I went to Millar. This was the buildings that were on campus back in those days. Of course, dinosaurs still roamed over the earth during that time. And this is a picture of me and my wife, my only wife. I'll talk a little more about her later on. And fell in love with her there. I sang in a quartet. I was involved in all sorts of activity. This is the day my friend Harold and I exchanged clothes. He wore mine and I wore his. And you can see the old Millar MMBI chapel in the background, and we used to have what we called gratis. This is out of the yearbook. Picture of me washing pots and pans there, and then another picture of me doing the dishes there as part of our what they called gratis. I don't know if they still have is it called student? No, student work would be when you go to work in a church or something like that. Do you have to do anything like that now?
Like field ad?
No, it's working, cleaning up the buildings and. Is that what it's called? Yeah, it's called student work. Okay. Well, it was there at Millar that I began to get this sense of God calling me into full-time Christian ministry. And so when I graduated, I was 20 years of age, and I went to see the district executive for the Alliance Churches in Saskatchewan about becoming a pastor. And he asked me how old I was. Actually, at that point in time, I was just a couple of months short of 21. And he looked at me and he said, I could give you a church, but I recommend you take a bit more education. And so I transferred to a place called Winnipeg College, now called Providence College out in Otterburn. And I immediately plunged into my studies. This was Linda and I. We were dating during that period of time. And she was working here in the city. She was a child evangelism secretary. And she worked for the CEF ministry here in town. And about that same time, it was in the fall of 1969, November to the 25th, my sister, and this is a picture of her and her family at that point in time, asked me to start a Bible study in her home in Grosse Isle. And Grosse Isle is about 15 kilometers from Stonewall, just northwest of the city. And about that same time in the Stonewall community, a group of people had left what I would term as a theologically liberal church and began meeting in this home, the intention of setting up a new church. And so the folks in meeting in this home found out about my Bible study, and they came and asked me if I would become their pastor. This was the announcement in the local newspaper, and you can see at the bottom there it says serving as pastor for the summer months, and that's myself. And we officially organized as a church March 19th, 1970, and there's at the bottom, me and my wife were the number 26 and 27. We were members of that group of people. We started holding services in the Stonewall Legion Hall. This is a picture of Linda and me in the winter of 1970. We had a nice group of people meeting there in the hall. During that same time, I was finishing up my Bachelor of Theology degree at Winnipeg Bible College, and that's me in the left-hand side there in the corner. And at that point in time, the church asked me to stay on as their full-time pastor, beginning July 15th. And Linda and I were married July 3rd, 1971. We moved into our new home in Stonewall a couple of weeks after our wedding. And in 1972, we began our first building program. While that church was being built, we ended up being asked to leave the Legion Hall for various reasons. And we started meeting then in the Stonewall Theater for a while. And then we lost that place. And for the summer of 1972, we met outdoors as a congregation. The services were outside in the front yard of one of the families in our church. And our building was finished in 72. And God gave us really good growth. The church began to grow. We added on in 74. We had a really large youth group. I remember we had 40, 50, 60 teenagers coming to our youth group. I broke my arm playing hockey at this point in time. You can see there, broke, I think, 7 bones playing sports in my lifetime, so I know pain. And then we built a sanctuary in 78. We added on. It was a good-sized sanctuary. And then in 2001, we moved the buildings as they were right in the community of Stonewall. We moved them, had movers move them out to an 18-acre plot of land on the outskirts of town. And in the summer of 2001, we built these buildings, and we dedicated this in 2014. And that's a picture of the complex there. and we have a $2.5 million mortgage, which was paid off in 2013. And so in total, I was pastor of this church for 44 and a half years, just short of 45, and a lovely congregation, just a fantastic group of people that I served for all those years. And through the years, I continued my education. I got a Master of Divinity degree in 1984, and then I got a Doctor of Ministry degree in 1999. And then also I've spent a couple of summers studying at Jerusalem University College, and I've taken a course, Historical and Geographical Settings to the Land of the Bible, 2006 and 2013. Back when I was in Winnipeg Bible College, the final semester of my classes there, we had a speaker come and challenge the students there, and he spoke to those of us who were seniors, and he made this statement. He said, find a town in Manitoba and give your life to that town. And his statement was build the greatest church in Manitoba. And I remember thinking, you know what, I'm going to do that. And I made that my life mission, and I have it in the front of my Bible, my mission statement, to give my life to the town of Stonewall to build there. I didn't like the statement, the greatest church. I put one of the greatest churches in Manitoba. And then they added the phrase, for the glory of God. I didn't want any credit to come to me. And I did that, made that commitment, and this was the local newspaper had a picture of me at one of the celebrations we had, and it said there, Ernie keeps his promise. And then I retired from the church in 2014, and then in 2019 I became the interim pastor of the church in Teulon. It was a daughter church of this church in Stonewall, and I'm still in that position to this day. This past July, my wife and I celebrated 50 years of married life together, and she's the love of my life. Very close behind is my 65 Mustang convertible, but she's ahead of it, I have to say. We have 4 children and 9 grandchildren. So that's a little bit about my life and my experiences growing up in ministry. So that's it.